In this video, we're going to work on the timing of an animation. In the last video, we blocked basically the movement of our mechanical arm to lift this object and place it on the other platform. But we were just blocking the basic movements of the arm. Now we're going to work on the timing of the animation so it looks better. So let's begin by again having an understanding of basically what our keyframes are doing. Alright, and another thing that is going to help us also is the fact that when we started this process, we blocked every movement every 5 keyframes. So what's going to help with the timing of this is being able to space these keyframes out so they're not so close to each other, so there's a little bit of distance between keyframes, that way making the movement not so fast. Okay, so let's begin let's begin by spacing our keyframes out, and then we're going to determine if we need to add any extra keyframes or add any extra action to make it look more appealing. So I want to begin with the first movement as it goes to this point and it goes down. Again, we only have 5 frames and that's just way too fast. So I'm going to select all the keyframes between 5 and the last keyframe, which is 40 here, and I'm going to move them back a little bit. And the reason I'm going to be doing that is so I can determine the right timing between the first movement and the movement at keyframe 5. So again, I selected all these keyframes by selecting the keyframe that I have here at 5, holding shift and just left click and dragging until I have all of my keyframes colored by this red highlight. Alright, to move my keyframes, I'm going to be using these arrows here at the center, not the ones outside, and I'm going to move them out. Okay, so what I want to be doing is going back to the beginning, alright, and just kind of getting an idea what moving this keyframe that I had at number 5 to number 10, okay, and you know, if it gives me somewhat of a better timing than I initially had. Now keep in mind that I actually marquee select all the keyframes. Okay, so I'm actually moving all the keyframes that I set up and not any specific keyframe that I might have set for a specific control. It's easier this way. So again, 10 frames seems to give me really nice timing. Alright, and I think I'm going to stick to that. Now again, for the sake of timing, one of the things that I want to make sure is that there's a little bit of a breathing room between actions, so that the action between 10 and the next frame doesn't happen automatically. Perhaps it'll be a good idea to maybe copy the keyframes that I have at 10 and paste them somewhere over here so it holds that pose for a couple of frames before it moves on for the next one. And another thing that I'm realizing here is that I am going to need a bigger timeline to be able to do this. Alright, so I'm going to expand my timeline to let's do 100 frames. Okay, and I'm just going to keep my range, let's keep it at 80 for now. So again, when it gets to this point, I feel like it needs to have a breather before it goes to the next action. So I'm going to take all the keyframes that I have at 10 and I'm going to copy them, and I'm going to make it hold that pose for maybe 5 frames, and then it's going to perform the next action. So I'm going to select all these keyframes. Alright, I'm going to move them further back. I'm going to move them really way back so I have space to kind of work with here. So at 10 stops, then I need to have 5 frames of it kind of holding this keyframe. So I'm gonna on frame 10, I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna copy all those keyframes, and I'm gonna go to frame 15 and then paste. Alright, so that means it's gonna hold that pose for about 5 frames before it goes down and does anything else. And the next movement, I want it to be maybe 5 to 10 frames. So the next keyframe, again, I'm gonna shift select all those keyframes right there, and I'm gonna move it to 25. And I just want to go back and just kind of play through and see if the timing here works a little bit better. Okay, it looks better if it holds that pose for a second before it does anything else. And perhaps 5 frames might be a little bit too much, because I wanted to have that kind of stop action before it does anything. The next movement, so maybe I'll keep it at 3 frames, so from 10 to 13. Okay, then it's gonna be 10 frames before he does the next movement, so that'll be 23. So I'm gonna select that, move it there. Okay, and then I wanted to hold this pose for another 3 frames, so I'm gonna select this frames, copy them, go 1, 2, 3 to 26, and then paste that. Again, keep in mind that my timing here is being a little arbitrary. I'm just going by what I feel it looks good. So you don't have to follow the specifics that I'm using here. Again, the idea is to take all your keyframes after the blocking part, and you need to kind of space them out so the animation looks more natural, so it's more appealing. And sometimes that you might need it to hold a pose for a little bit, so it has a little bit of a breathing room there. Okay, so again, at 26, I probably want to give it 10 frames for the next action. So at 36, I'm going to have the next set of keyframes there, and I want to hold that for another 3 keyframes. Alright, so it holds that pose before it does anything else. Okay, so this one's at 36, so I'm gonna hold that pose for about 3 frames or so, and then at 39, then it's gonna move on to the next pose, which is it kind of moving up. And I want to, again, between every big action, I want to give it somewhere around 10 frames, and I'm gonna have to move all these the frames back. Okay, so I'm going to select all of these, move them back so I can have more space to work with here. And then at 49, okay, so every 10 frames there, I'm going to move this one for it to go up, and then to go to the other side. Let's see if what I have here works fine. So let's see what the action looks like so far. That might be a little bit too much or too fast. So again, we need to kind of space this out a little bit. Let's just get all 100 frames. Okay. Then I'm just going to select this, and I'm going to just increase that and just kind of test the timing to see what works better. So, alright, I think this is going to work really well. Somewhere around 20 frames or so. Alright, so now I need to space out the keyframes that I have for the action that's happening on the other side. Okay, so same thing as I've been doing before. I probably want this mechanical arm to hold that pose for a couple of frames before he does the next movement. So let's just select all these, move them back, select this one, copy it, 1, 2, 3, and paste. So that way it's going to keep that pose for a little bit before it goes down. And every major movement I've determined that I want to give it about 10 frames. Okay, so again, just taking all these keyframes and just kind of move them back. Let's just go 120 and just expand my timeline here. Alright, and if it's starting to get really difficult for you to see where you're setting your keyframes, again, remember you have this range slider, so we can just kind of work in a part of the timeline, not necessarily the whole thing. So it's going to hold this point 10 frames. I want this pose to hold for about 3 frames as well. Alright, so I'm gonna copy this, 1, 2, 3, paste it. Okay, so once it drops it, again, it's gonna do the next action. It should take about 10 frames to do so. So I need to move this keyframe to 94. So let's just see the timing of that. Okay. So I probably wanted to hold this pose for 3 frames. Just copy that. Paste. Alright, and then we're gonna give it let's give it about 20 frames to do the last movement. Just see what that does with our timing. So around 107, 110. Alright, so let's just look at the timing of our animation. And I'm just going to bring out the whole timeline that I used, which is about 120 frames. Okay, so maybe the initial movement of the claw from this point to 10 might be a little bit too quick, because every other large movement like that, I've given it about 20 frames, so I'm just going to space out this whole thing a little bit. So by selecting all my keyframes, I'm just going to move this up by 10 frames or so. Let's try 15, see what it does. Alright, and I think this is working pretty well. So again, our initial pass of blocking the animation was just to kind of set up the main notes or keyframes or poses that we wanted our mechanical arm to hit, and then we go back and do a second pass where we're just kind of fixing the timing of our animation to make sure it's not going too fast and that whoever's looking at this is understanding what's happening here. Alright, so this concludes the video on timing, fixing the timing of your animation. And in this, the next one, we're gonna talk about how we gonna use constraining to actually have the claw lift up the box object and drop it in the other surface.